Lesson 12. Jacob's Exile and Return. I will keep thee in all places thou goest. Reading Genesis 28 to 33. Objective: to see how God worked in Jacob's life, caring for him and giving him the opportunity to overcome his human weaknesses. Background: Jacob left the land of promise on the advice of Rebekah, with the blessings of Abraham bestowed on him by Isaac. Genesis 28 verse 3 to 4. His immediate plan was to flee from the rage of Esau, who was determined to kill him for deceiving their father and depriving him of the blessing due to the firstborn. So Jacob departed for Haran, in Padan Aram, and the house of his uncle Laban. Verse 5. Jacob's dream and vow at Bethel. Genesis 28 verse 10 to 22. After a long and lonely journey, about 75 kilometres, Jacob came to Bethel, which means house of God. As Jacob slept, he dreamed. In his dream, he saw a staircase which connected heaven and earth, with the angels of God ascending and descending on it. Verse 12. Here the voice of Yahweh spoke to him, confirming to him the great promises already made to Abraham and Isaac. In particular, he was told that the land on which he was lying would be given to him and his seed. His seed would be as the dust of the earth. His seed would spread to the west, east, north and south. In him and his seed, all the families of the earth would be blessed. Verse 13 and 14. God also reassured Jacob that he was not alone, for he said, Behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all the places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land. For I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken to thee of. Verse 15. Jacob awoke from his dream in fear and said, Surely Yahweh is in this place, and I knew it not. This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Verse 16 and 17. When Jacob awoke, he vowed a vow that if God would preserve him, provide for him, and bring him back to his father's house in peace, then Yahweh would be his God. Verse 21. Jacob was not bargaining with God, but beseeching his help along the way. He had confidence in God and was expressing his determination to serve him. Principle for living. God is caring for us in times of trouble. Jacob was a skillful and determined person, confident of being able to solve all the problems of life by himself. The scheming and deception that he and his mother had practiced had only brought trouble. God would bring him to realize, through the experiences of his life, that he could not rely on his own strength and schemes. He had to learn to submit to God and allow him to be his guide in all things. We all need to learn this lesson. Jacob's life was not always easy. Sometimes he brought trouble on himself as he struggled to learn to submit his will to God. He had earned Esau's hatred by his scheming to gain the birthright. Sometimes he suffered unfairly at the hands of others, especially in the house of Laban, when he asked to marry Rachel and was given Leah. Genesis 29 verse 18 to 25. And in the matter of his wages. Genesis 31 verse 7. But God was caring for Jacob to teach him important lessons. The challenge for Jacob and ourselves is to respond in a godly manner that shows we have faith in his overshadowing power, knowing that all things work together for good to them that love God. Romans 8 verse 28. Psalm 121 is encouraging to remember in times of trouble. Behold, he that keepeth Israel shall neither slumber nor sleep. Verse 4. If we are true children of Israel, we can trust in the God of Jacob. Happy is he that hath the God of Jacob for his help, whose hope is in Yahweh his God. Psalm 146 verse 5. At the end of his trials, Jacob could recognize the hand of God. This is also true of trials we may have in life. They may seem very difficult at the time, but at the end they bring forth a godly character, that the trial of your faith might be found unto praise and honour and glory at the appearing of Jesus Christ. 1 Peter 1 verse 7. Jacob in the house of Laban. Genesis 29 and 30. God's providence can be clearly seen in the life of Jacob. God guided his journey to bring him to Laban's house. As he journeyed, he came upon a well where the shepherds happened to come from Haran and knew Laban. Genesis 29 verse 1 to 5. As he spoke with them, the daughter of Laban approached with her father's flock. Verse 9. This was Rachel, who then introduced Jacob to her family. Verses 12 to 14. This was as much the hand of God as in the case of Abraham's servant Eliezer. Jacob had been guided to the house of Laban, where he lived and worked for him. Jacob stayed for a month, and Laban then offered him wages. Verse 15. He loved Rachel, so Jacob said, I will serve thee 7 years for Rachel, thy younger daughter. And Laban agreed. Verses 18 and 19. 7 years were a long time, but they seemed unto him but a few days for the love he had to her. Verse 20. When the day came, however, he was to be bitterly disappointed, for Laban tricked him and gave him Leah. Verse 25. Jacob, who had deceived his father, was now himself deceived by the scheming Laban, his mother's brother. He outwitted Jacob to keep him working hard for him. The week of festivities for his marriage to Leah must first be fulfilled. Then he could marry Rachel. But he must agree to work for Laban another 7 years. Verse 27. Now Jacob had not one wife, but 2, plus their handmaids, and his household was often the scene of strife. Rachel was the favoured wife, but she remained barren for many years, whereas Leah was blessed with children. Verses 30 and 31. This produced great friction between the sisters and competition for Jacob's love and affection. In due time, God blessed Rachel with 2 sons, Joseph and Benjamin. Genesis 30 verse 22. Leah had 6 sons and 1 daughter. Verses 20 and 21. While the 2 handmaids, Bilhah and Zilpah, also bare 2 sons, each to Jacob. In all, Jacob had 12 sons and 1 daughter. Jacob's return to the land of promise. Genesis 31. Jacob had served Laban for many years. God had blessed Laban's household while Jacob was there, and his wealth had increased. Genesis 30 verse 30. God had been watching over Jacob to teach him patience and dependence on him. And although the scheming Laban had changed Jacob's wages 10 times in order to make the most out of him, Genesis 31 verse 7, God was in control of the situation. And so Jacob now prospered to become a wealthy man. Genesis 30 verse 43. The agreement with Laban was that all the discoloured cattle would be for Jacob's wages. Verse 32. At the hand of God, all the newborn cattle were discoloured. As Jacob's herds increased, so Laban's herds decreased, and strife developed between the households of Laban and Jacob. Genesis 31, verse 1 to 2. It was always in God's plan that Jacob would return home, and that time was approaching. God now commanded Jacob to return unto the land of thy fathers and to thy kindred. Genesis 31 verse 3. So fearing Laban's displeasure, Jacob departed secretly with his wives and children, cattle and flocks. Verses 17 to 21. It was 3 days later that Laban was told of Jacob's departure, and so he pursued after him. God knew Laban's heart and appeared to him in a dream by night, warning him to be careful how he dealt with Jacob. Laban had intended to do him harm, verse 29, and angrily accused Jacob of stealing away with his daughters and his grandchildren, verses 26 to 28. He even accused Jacob of stealing his gods, verse 30. In fact, quite unknown to Jacob, Rachel had stolen them and hidden them in her tent under the goods on which she was sitting. Search was made, but Laban was unable to prove his accusations. They then made a covenant together before God that neither would pass that place to do harm to the other. Verse 52. And Laban returned home. Verse 55. Jacob's reunion with Esau. Genesis 32 and 33. As Jacob continued on his way home, angels of God met him to reassure him that God was with him. Genesis 32 verse 1. Even though many years had passed since he had deceived his father and gained the birthright, Jacob could not shake off the anxiety he felt about meeting Esau. Would Esau still want to do him harm? Jacob sent messengers to Esau, who returned with the news that Esau himself was on his way to meet them, and 400 men with him. Verse 6. Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. Verse 7. The visit from the angels was not enough to convince Jacob that God would care for him. He imagined the wrath of Esau and made his own plans to appease him. He divided his company into 2 groups, hoping to save one part if Esau attacked, and also sent generous gifts to Esau. Again he prays to God for deliverance. Having done all he could to prepare for Esau's coming, Jacob sent his company forward, verse 23, and himself remained alone, where the angel of God revisited him. Jacob wrestled with him, demanding a blessing from him. Jacob wanted strength to face Esau, but all he received from the angel was physical weakness. Verse 24 and 25. His strength was to be in God, and now Jacob was in no position to rely on his own ability. This is the lesson God had been trying to teach Jacob for many years, and now he had no option but to trust in God's care. The angel did bless him in changing his name to Israel, meaning a prince of God. Verse 28. No longer would he be a supplanter, but now a prince. Jacob then called the name of the place Peniel, the face of God. For I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Verse 30. From that time on, Jacob halted upon his thigh. He had received from the angel a physical handicap, which would remind him for the rest of his life that he could not rely on his own strength, but should rely on God. Imagine his immense relief when, later that day, Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Genesis 33 verse 4. Summary. On Jacob's journey to Haran, he stopped at Bethel and received from God a vision of angels. God reaffirmed to him the promises made to Abraham, and promised also to preserve him and provide for him in all his ways. God directed him to the house of Laban, where he married Leah and Rachel. Despite Laban's continual deception of Jacob, he remained a faithful and hard-working shepherd. Jacob left secretly with his family in answer to God's command. Yahweh saved him from Laban's intention to harm him. Hearing of Esau's approach with 400 men, Jacob was greatly afraid. He wrestled with an angel, seeking a blessing from him to face Esau. He was physically weakened, but his faith was strengthened. Limping on his thigh, he knew he could only trust in Yahweh as he went to meet Esau. His meeting with Esau was warm and brotherly.
These lessons are the words taken from the Christadelphian Sunday School Association notes, www.cssa.asn.au, used with permission. Email your questions to readthebible2@gmail.com, and we look forward to you listening to the next lesson, which will be called Joseph in His Youth, Faithful Under Trial.